I stood in my own kitchen heart, pounding so hard. I thought it might burst, and Megan was there, sobbing her eyes out, clutching Randy's arm like she was about to collapse. Her mascara streaked down her face, and she was gasping out words between her cries, telling him I'd tried to hit her, that I'd lost it, and attacked her right here in this house. Randy's face was red, his eyes wide with shock and rage, and he turned to me, his own mother, and shouted, "How could you do this to her?" I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come because the betrayal hit me like a freight train. My own son, the boy I'd raised from diapers, was looking at me like I was a monster. Megan kept crying louder now, saying I'd screamed at her, pushed her against the counter, and swung at her with my fist. It was all lies, every single word, but Randy believed her. He was shaking with anger, and before I could even process what was happening, he pointed at the door and said, "You need to get out, Mom. You can't stay here anymore." My chest tightened, and I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I looked at Megan, still clinging to him, her eyes flickering for just a second, and I knew she was lying. But Randy wasn't hearing me, wasn't seeing me, and I realized in that moment I'd lost him to her. So I didn't scream or beg or fight. I just nodded, grabbed my purse, and walked out of my own home, leaving behind the life I'd built for 30 years. But what they didn't know was that I'd hidden a tiny camera in the kitchen weeks ago because I had started to suspect Megan wasn't who she seemed. Before I dive into this story, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and comment with where you're watching from. Your support means everything. My name is Cheryl. I'm 62 years old, and I've lived in Florida my whole life. This house in Tampa was where I raised Randy, where we laughed and cried and built a family. When Randy married Megan 3 years ago, I was thrilled. She seemed sweet at first, always smiling, bringing over homemade cookies, asking me about my garden. I thought she was perfect for him. But over time, things changed. She'd snap at me when Randy wasn't around, make little comments about how I was too old to keep up with the house, or how I was in the way. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe she was just stressed, but it kept happening. Then, I noticed how she'd twist things, like telling Randy I'd forgotten to buy groceries when I'd just stocked the fridge, or saying I'd been rude to her friends when I'd barely spoken to them. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, but I didn't want to cause trouble for Randy. He loved her, and I wanted him to be happy. So I stayed quiet, kept my head down, and tried to keep the peace. About a month ago, I got this gut feeling. Something was off. Megan had been acting stranger than usual, avoiding me completely, or giving me these cold stares when Randy wasn't looking. I didn't have proof of anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling she was up to something. That's when I decided to buy the camera. It was one of those tiny ones. You can hide anywhere, and I tucked it behind a canister on the kitchen counter. I didn't tell anyone, not even my sister Linda, who I tell everything to. I just wanted to know what was really going on when I wasn't around. The camera recorded everything, and I'd check it every few days. But for weeks, there was nothing, just normal stuff, like Megan cooking or Randy grabbing a beer from the fridge. Until that day, the day she accused me of attacking her. That morning started like any other. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, and Megan came in to grab a glass of water. She didn't say a word to me, just stood there, sipping her water and staring out the window. I tried to make small talk, asking if she and Randy had plans for the weekend, but she just shrugged and said, "Not really." Her tone was sharp, like I'd annoyed her just by existing. I let it go and kept chopping. Then, out of nowhere, she slammed her glass down on the counter so hard, I jumped. She turned to me, her eyes narrowing, and said, "You know, Cheryl, you're always in the way. Maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." I was stunned. I'd lived in this house since before she was born, and now she was telling me to leave. I kept my voice calm and said, "Megan, this is my home. I'm not going anywhere." She smirked like she'd been waiting for me to say that. And then she walked out of the kitchen without another word. I stood there, heart racing, trying to figure out what had just happened. That's when I knew something big was coming. A few hours later, Randy got home from work. I was still in the kitchen finishing up dinner when I heard Megan start crying from the living room. I couldn't make out what she was saying at first, but her sobs were loud and dramatic, like she was putting on a show. I walked to the doorway to see what was wrong, and that's when I saw her clinging to Randy, telling him I'd tried to hit her. She said I'd screamed at her, called her names, and then pushed her against the counter before swinging at her. Randy was furious, his fists clenched as he listened to her. I tried to tell him it wasn't true that I'd never laid a hand on her, but he cut me off, shouting, "Mom, stop lying. She's terrified of you." Megan was crying harder now, saying she didn't feel safe with me in the house. I looked at her, and for a split second, I saw that same smirk from earlier, hidden behind her tears. That's when I knew she'd planned this. Randy wouldn't listen to me, wouldn't even let me get a word in. He kept saying I'd crossed a line, and that he couldn't have me around if I was going to hurt his wife. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like I was watching my life fall apart, and I couldn't stop it. I wanted to scream that she was lying, that I'd never do something like that. But the look in Randy's eyes told me he'd already made up his mind. So I did the only thing I could. I grabbed my purse, my keys, and a small bag of clothes, and I left. I didn't argue or plead, because I knew it wouldn't change anything. Not yet. As I walked out the door, I heard Megan's sobs quiet down, and I knew she'd gotten what she wanted. But she didn't know about the camera. I drove to my sister Linda's house about 20 minutes away. When I got there, I could barely speak. Linda sat me down, made me a cup of tea, and asked what had happened. I told her everything, the accusation. Randy's reaction, Megan's lies. Linda was furious, said we needed to go back and confront them, but I stopped her. I told her about the camera and how I needed to check the footage first. I wasn't going to fight a war without proof. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the day in my head, wondering how my own son could believe her over me. I raised him, gave him everything, and now he was choosing her, a woman who'd lied to his face. It hurt more than I can describe. But I wasn't going to let her win. The next morning I went back to the house, when I knew Randy and Megan would be at work. I let myself in with my spare key, and went straight to the kitchen. My hands were shaking, as I pulled the camera from its hiding spot. I took it back to Linda's, plugged it into her laptop, and started watching. The footage was clear as day. It showed Megan coming into the kitchen that morning, grabbing her water, and standing there like I'd described. You could hear me trying to talk to her, and her cold response. Then it showed her slamming the glass down, saying I was in the way, telling me to leave. My voice was calm on the tape, just like I remembered saying this was my home. And then she smirked and walked out. There was no screaming, no pushing, no swinging. None of it. She'd made it all up. I felt a mix of relief and rage. Relief because I had proof, and rage because she'd manipulated my son against me. I made a copy of the footage and saved it on a USB drive. I wasn't sure what to do next, but I knew I had to show Randy. He deserved to know the truth, even if it broke his heart. I called him and asked him to meet me at Linda's that evening. He sounded annoyed, said he was busy, but I told him it was important, that it was about Megan. He agreed to come, but I could tell he was still angry with me. When he showed up that night, he barely looked at me, just sat on Linda's couch with his arms crossed. Megan wasn't with him, thank God, because I didn't want her there for this. I took a deep breath and told him I had something to show him. I plugged the USB into Linda's television and played the footage. As the video started, Randy's face changed. He leaned forward, watching Megan's every move, listening to her words. When it got to the part where she told me to leave, his jaw tightened, and when she smirked, he froze. The footage ended, and the room was silent. I looked at him, waiting for him to say something, but he just sat there staring at the blank screen. Finally, he turned to me, his eyes red, and said, "Mom, I'm so sorry." His voice cracked, and I could see the weight of it hitting him. He'd believed her, trusted her, and she'd played him. I wanted to hug him, tell him it was okay, but I was still hurting too. I just nodded and said, "You need to figure out what to do now, Randy." He left Linda's house that night without saying much else. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew things would never be the same. The truth was out, and Megan's lies had been exposed. But even with the proof, even with Randy's apology, I couldn't shake the pain of what had happened. My own son had turned against me, had thrown me out of my home. And Megan, she'd planned it all, twisted everything to get what she wanted. I stayed at Linda's for the next few days, waiting to see what Randy would do. Part of me hoped he'd come back, begging me to move home. But another part of me wasn't sure I could go back, not after everything. As the days stretched on, I found myself replaying every moment of that confrontation over and over in my mind. The sound of Megan's fake sobs echoed in my ears, the way her voice trembled as she spun her story. I kept seeing Randy's face, the way his eyes narrowed with fury, the way his voice rose when he told me to leave. It was like a loop I couldn't escape, and each time I relived it, the hurt grew sharper. I'd spent decades building this life in Tampa, raising Randy on my own after his dad was gone, working long hours to keep a roof over our heads. This house was more than just walls. It was every late-night talk, every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every birthday cake I'd baked. And now it felt like a stranger's place, a battleground where I'd been ambushed by my own family. Linda tried to keep my spirits up. She'd sit with me in her small living room, bringing me coffee, or flipping through old photo albums to remind me of better times. She'd tell me stories about when we were kids growing up in Florida, about the summers we spent at the beach, or the trouble we got into with our bikes. It helped a little, but it couldn't erase the sting of what Megan had done. Linda kept saying we should go back and face them, that Randy needed to see me stand up for myself, but I wasn't ready. I needed that footage to speak for me first. I needed hard evidence, because I knew Megan would twist anything I said into more lies. Back at the house that morning, when I retrieved the camera, I noticed other things too. The kitchen looked different, somehow emptier, like Megan had already started marking her territory. My favorite mug, the one with the faded flower pattern, was missing from the shelf, and the dish towel I always kept by the sink was gone. It was small stuff, but it felt like she was erasing me piece by piece, even before the big accusation. I stood there for a moment, taking it all in the silence of the house, pressing down on me. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, the only sound as I grabbed the camera and hurried out. I didn't want to be there longer than I had to, not with the memory of Randy's angry voice still ringing in my ears. When I got back to Linda's, I sat with the laptop open for hours, watching that footage again and again. I zoomed in on Megan's face, trying to understand how she could do this. Her smirk was so quick, so subtle, but it was there clear as day. I watched myself on the screen, calm and steady chopping vegetables, unaware of the storm that was coming. It was surreal seeing it all laid out like that, a silent movie of my life unraveling. I saved multiple copies of the video on different drives just to be safe. I couldn't risk losing it, not when it was my only defense against Megan's lies. That evening, when Randy came to Linda's, I could see the exhaustion in him too. His shoulders were slumped, his clothes wrinkled, like he'd been pacing all day. He didn't sit down right away, just stood by the door for a moment, like he wasn't sure he belonged there. When he finally sat, it was with a heavy sigh, and I knew this wasn't easy for him either. Watching the footage with him was agonizing. I kept glancing at his face, trying to gauge his reaction, but he was locked in staring at the screen. When Megan's smirk flashed across the television, his whole body tensed, and I held my breath, waiting for what he'd do next. After he apologized and left, I sat with Linda, talking it over. She was convinced Randy would come around, that he'd see through Megan once and for all. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't so sure. Randy had been so sure of himself when he told me to leave, so certain I was the problem. That kind of belief doesn't vanish overnight. I started thinking about what I'd do if he didn't come back, if he chose to stay with Megan despite the truth. The idea made my stomach turn, but I had to prepare for it. This house, this life, it might not be mine anymore, and that realization hit harder than I expected. The next day, I went for a walk around Linda's neighborhood, trying to clear my head. The Florida sun was brutal, beating down on the pavement, and I found myself sweating under the weight of my thoughts. I passed kids playing in a sprinkler, an old man watering his lawn, a dog barking at a passing car, and it all felt so normal, so far from the chaos I was living. I stopped at a park bench, sat down, and just watched the world go by. For a moment, I let myself imagine a different life, one where I wasn't fighting to prove my innocence, One where Randy and I were still a team. But then my phone buzzed with a text from him, asking if we could talk again, and I knew the fight wasn't over yet. I spent the afternoon at Linda's, going over every detail of the footage, with her pointing out Megan's movements, her tone, her smirk. Linda agreed it was damning evidence, but she warned me to be ready for Megan to fight back. She said people like that don't give up easily, and I knew she was right. I started making a list of what I'd need to do next. Call a lawyer, maybe get advice from someone who'd been through this. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I couldn't let Megan win. Not after what she'd done to me, to Randy, to our family. That night, I lay awake again, the hum of Linda's air conditioner filling the room. I thought about the camera, how it had become my lifeline, how it held the key to my redemption. I thought about Randy, and how much I loved him, how much I wanted to forgive him, but also how much it hurt to be cast out. I thought about Megan, and what drove her to this, what she hoped to gain. Was it the house, the money, the control? I didn't have answers, but I knew I'd find them. The footage was just the beginning, and I was determined to see this through no matter how long it took. I woke up the next morning, with a plan forming in my mind. I decided to call a friend who worked at a local legal aid office to get some advice on my options. Her name was Janet, and she'd always been someone I could count on for straight talk. I explained the situation, the camera, the footage, Megan's lies, and Randy's reaction. Janet listened carefully, then told me I had a strong case, but I'd need to act fast. She suggested getting a lawyer who specialized in family disputes, and maybe even filing for a restraining order if Megan tried to come after me again. It sounded overwhelming, but I thanked her and promised to follow up. I spent the rest of the day researching lawyers online, jotting down names and numbers, feeling a small spark of hope that I could take control of this mess. Linda noticed the change in me that afternoon. She asked what was going on, and I told her about my call with Janet. She clapped her hands, said it was about time I fought back. We sat together at her kitchen table, going over the list of lawyers, talking about what I might say when I called. Linda even offered to come with me to any meetings to give me moral support. It felt good to have her on my side, to have someone who believed me without question. We spent hours on that call, planning our next steps. And for the first time, since that awful day, I felt like I wasn't just reacting, I was taking action. By evening, I'd narrowed it down to 3 lawyers to contact the next day. I wrote a quick email to each one outlining the basics of what had happened, attaching a brief note about the footage. I didn't sleep much that night, too wired from the day's decisions, but I felt a shift inside me. The pain was still there, the betrayal still raw, but now there was a purpose. I wasn't going to let Megan define my story, or Randy's. I was going to fight for what was mine, and for the truth, no matter how hard it got. The camera had given me a chance, and I wasn't going to waste it. A few days after Randy saw the footage, he called me, sounding like he hadn't slept in days. His voice was low, shaky, almost like he was afraid to talk. He said he needed to see me again, that he'd confronted Megan, and things had gone bad. I told him to come to Linda's, and when he showed up, he looked like a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot, his hair a mess, and he kept rubbing his hands together like he didn't know what to do with them. He sat down on the couch and started talking fast, like he needed to get it all out before he lost his nerve. He said he'd gone home that night, after seeing the video, and waited for Megan to get back from her yoga class. When she walked in, acting all sweet, like nothing had happened, he couldn't hold it in. He told her he knew the truth, showed her the footage on his phone, and demanded to know why she'd lied. Megan's reaction wasn't what he expected. He thought she'd cry or beg for forgiveness, but instead, she got defensive and started yelling that I'd set her up, that the camera was illegal, and I'd invaded her privacy. She said I'd been out to get her from the start, and the video didn't prove anything. Randy was floored. He'd caught her in a lie, clear as day, and she was still trying to twist it. He said they fought for hours, her screaming him trying to stay calm, until finally she admitted she'd exaggerated some things, but only because she felt trapped living with me. She said I made her feel unwelcome, that I was always hovering, always judging her. Randy didn't buy it. He told her the footage showed her starting the fight, not me, and that she'd made it all up to get me out of the house. That's when she snapped, said she deserved to live in a home without me lurking around, and if he couldn't see that he was choosing me over her, Randy said he felt like he was seeing her for the first time. The woman he'd married, the one he thought was kind and loving, was someone else entirely. He told her he couldn't trust her anymore, that she'd manipulated him against his own mother. Megan didn't back down. She said if he was taking my side, then maybe they shouldn't be together. Randy was gutted, but he didn't waver. He told her he wanted a divorce. When he said that, her whole demeanor changed. She went from angry to cold, said, "Fine, Randy, do what you want," and stormed out of the house. He hadn't seen her since. Listening to him tell me this, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because he'd seen through her lies, and sadness because I knew how much he'd loved her. I'd never wanted this for him, a broken marriage, a betrayal like this. But I was also angry still, so angry that Megan had torn our family apart and that Randy had believed her over me in the first place. I asked him what he was going to do now, and he said he didn't know. He'd already contacted a lawyer, started looking into what a divorce would mean, but he was overwhelmed. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, and said, "Mom, will you come back home? I was wrong. I'm so sorry." My heart ached hearing him say that, but something in me held back. I told him I needed time, that I wasn't sure I could just walk back into that house like nothing had happened. The next few weeks were a blur. Randy moved forward with the divorce, and Megan didn't make it easy. She hired a lawyer of her own, started demanding half of everything, the house, the savings, even Randy's car. She was playing hardball, acting like she was the victim in all this. Randy was a mess, trying to juggle work and the legal stuff while dealing with the emotional fallout. I stayed at Linda's helping where I could, but I kept my distance from the house. Every time I thought about going back, I'd remember that moment. Randy told me to leave the way he looked at me, like I was the enemy. It wasn't just Megan's lies that had broken something. It was his choice to believe her. One day, Randy called me in a panic. He said Megan had shown up at the house while he was at work and taken a bunch of stuff, furniture, electronics, even some of my old photo albums. He'd come home to find the place half empty, and a note from her saying she was entitled to it. I was furious. Those albums had pictures of Randy as a baby of his dad, before he passed, of our family when things were good. I told Randy to call his lawyer and report it, but he was so defeated, he just kept saying, "Why is she doing this?" I wanted to shake him, tell him to fight back, but I knew he was hurting. Instead, I went to the house myself for the first time since I'd left. Walking through the front door felt like stepping into a stranger's home. The living room was bare, the couch gone, the television missing. In the kitchen, my favorite mugs were gone, the ones Randy had made me in pottery class when he was a kid. I went upstairs and found my bedroom untouched. Thank God, but the guest room where Megan had kept her things was cleaned out. I sat on the floor in the living room, surrounded by the emptiness, and felt a rage I hadn't felt in years. Megan wasn't just trying to hurt Randy, she was trying to erase me, to take everything that mattered. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let her win, not completely. I called Linda, and we started making a plan. We went through the house cataloging everything that was missing, took pictures, and sent them to Randy's lawyer. I also checked the camera, which I'd left in the kitchen, just in case. Sure enough, it had caught Megan coming in that day, loading bags and boxes into her car. She wasn't alone either. There was a guy with her, someone I'd never seen before, helping her carry stuff out. I didn't know who he was, but I saved the footage and sent it to Randy. I told him he needed to use the show, the lawyer, how she was stealing from us. He thanked me, said he'd handle it, but I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. As the divorce dragged on, Megan kept up her games. She'd call Randy late at night crying, saying she missed him, then turn around and send nasty emails to his lawyer, demanding more money. She even started posting on social media about how she'd been forced out of her home by her abusive mother-in-law. I saw one of her posts when Linda showed me her phone, and it took everything in me not to respond. She was painting herself as the victim, telling half-truths to anyone who'd listen. Some of Randy's old friends even reached out to him asking if it was true, if I'd really been that bad to her. It was infuriating, But I told Randy to ignore it, focus on the divorce, and let the truth come out in court. Meanwhile, I was still at Linda's, trying to figure out what I wanted. Randy kept asking me to come home, said the house felt wrong without me, but I wasn't ready. I'd spent 30 years building that home, pouring my heart into it, and in one day, Megan had turned it into a battleground. Even with her gone, even with the divorce moving forward, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were broken. I started thinking about what I wanted for myself, not just for Randy. I'd given so much to that house to my family, and now I was wondering if it was time to start over somewhere new. The days turned into weeks, and I found myself spending more time with Linda, talking about the past, reminiscing about the days when life was simpler. She'd bring up old memories like the time we snuck into a neighbor's pool or the summer we spent selling lemonade to earn money for a new bike. It was a distraction, but it also made me realize how much I'd sacrificed for Randy, how I'd put my own dreams on hold to be there for him. Now with Megan's betrayal fresh in my mind, I started questioning if staying in Tampa was worth it. The house held too many wounds, too many echoes of that night. Randy kept calling, checking in, asking for updates on the divorce. He'd tell me about the lawyer's progress, how they were building a case against Megan's demands. He sounded determined, but tired, and I could tell he was struggling to keep it together. I offered to help him sort through some of the legal papers, but he said he'd handle it. I respected that, but it left me feeling useless, like I was on the outside looking in. Linda suggested we take a drive to clear our heads, and we ended up at a small diner on the edge of town. Over coffee and pie, we talked about what might come next, and I admitted I wasn't sure I could go back to the house, even if Randy begged me. That night, I lay awake thinking about the camera footage again. I pulled out my laptop and watched it once more, focusing on the details I'd missed before. The way Megan moved so confidently, the way she timed her exit after that smirk. It was calculated, and that realization made my blood boil. I started writing down everything I remembered from that day, the sound of the glass hitting the counter, the way Randy's voice shook when he yelled. It was my way of processing it, my way of holding on to the truth. By morning, I had pages of notes and a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just fighting for my home, I was fighting for my dignity. The next day, I called one of the lawyers I'd emailed. Her name was Karen, and she sounded sharp on the phone. I explained the situation, gave her the basics about the footage and Megan's theft. She asked me to come in for a meeting, and I agreed, setting it up for the following week. Linda came with me for support, and we spent the drive talking about what I'd say. Karen was professional, but kind listened as I laid it all out. She said the footage was strong evidence, and with Megan's recent actions, they had a solid case. She warned me, it might get messy, but promised to fight for me. Leaving that office, I felt a weight lift a little, knowing I had someone in my corner. Back at Linda's, I started preparing for what might come. I gathered more evidence, old receipts for the house photos of the missing items, anything that could help. Randy called that evening to say his lawyer had received the new footage and was impressed. He sounded hopeful for the first time in weeks, and I felt a flicker of pride. But I also knew this was just the beginning. Megan wasn't going to go down without a fight, and I had to be ready. I spent the next few days organizing my thoughts, talking to Linda about strategies. We even practiced what I'd say if I had to testify. It was exhausting, but necessary, and I was determined to see it through. The divorce hearing was set for a humid morning in late August, and Randy asked me to be there. He said he needed me in the courtroom, not just for support, but to testify if it came to that. I didn't want to go, didn't want to see Megan's face or hear her lies again, but I knew I had to for him. Linda came with me, said she wouldn't let me face it alone. When we got to the courthouse in downtown Tampa, I felt my stomach churn. The building was cold and sterile, and the thought of sitting across from Megan made my skin crawl. Randy was already there with his lawyer, a sharp woman named Karen, who'd been working hard to protect him. She pulled me aside before we went in, said the footage from the camera was going to be a big part of their case. She'd also tracked down the guy who'd helped Megan take our stuff. Turns out he was an ex-boyfriend she'd been seeing behind Randy's back. That was another blow for Randy, but it strengthened his case. Inside the courtroom, Megan was sitting with her lawyer, looking calm and collected, like she hadn't spent months tearing our lives apart. She was dressed in a modest blouse, her hair pulled back, playing the part of the innocent wife. When she saw me, she gave me a small smile, like we were old friends, and it made my blood boil. I sat behind Randy, gripping Linda's hand as the hearing started. Karen presented their case, first laying out how Megan had lied about the abuse, how she'd manipulated Randy, and tried to force me out of my own home. She played the kitchen footage on a screen, and I watched Megan's face as it played. Her smile faded her eyes, darting to her lawyer, like she was looking for a way out. The judge, an older man with a no-nonsense vibe, watched the video closely nodding as Karen explained how it proved Megan's accusations were false. Then Karen brought up the theft. She showed the footage of Megan and her ex-boyfriend taking our things, listed the missing items, including my photo albums, and explained how Megan had violated the temporary agreement that said neither party could remove property from the home. Randy testified next, his voice steady but emotional, as he talked about how he'd trusted Megan, how her lies had turned him against me. He said he was ashamed of himself for believing her, and that he just wanted to move on. Listening to him, I felt a pang of pride, but also pain, because I knew how much this had cost him. When it was Megan's turn, her lawyer tried to spin the story. He said the kitchen footage was taken out of context, that Megan had felt threatened by me for months and was just trying to protect herself. He claimed the items she took were hers, that she'd bought them during the marriage. It was a weak defense, and the judge didn't seem impressed. Megan took the stand, and I braced myself for more lies. She started crying almost on cue, saying she'd been unhappy living with me, that I'd made her feel like an outsider. She admitted to exaggerating the fight in the kitchen, but said it was because she was desperate to get away from me. Her voice was soft, trembling like she was the victim, and I could see some people in the courtroom softening toward her. But the judge wasn't buying it. He asked her why she'd taken my personal belongings like the photo albums, and she stumbled, couldn't give a straight answer. Karen cross-examined her and didn't hold back. She asked Megan about the ex-boyfriend, about the late-night calls to Randy, about the social media posts. Megan tried to dodge the questions, but Karen was relentless, pulling out evidence like text messages between Megan and her ex that showed they'd been planning to sell our stuff for cash. By the time Karen was done, Megan looked defeated, her tears gone, her face pale. The judge took a recess to review everything, and we waited in the hallway, my heart racing. Linda kept saying, "We had this, that the truth was on our side," but I wasn't so sure. Megan was slippery, and I was afraid she'd find a way to wiggle out. When we went back in, the judge didn't waste time. He ruled in Randy's favor, saying the evidence clearly showed Megan had fabricated the abuse allegations and acted in bad faith by taking our property. He granted the divorce, ordered Megan to return the stolen items or pay for their value, and awarded Randy the house since it had been in my name before the marriage. Megan's lawyer tried to argue for alimony, but the judge shut it down, said her behavior didn't entitle her to anything. It was a clean win, but it didn't feel like a victory. Randy looked relieved but hollow, like he'd aged 10 years in a few months. Megan didn't look at us as she left the courtroom, just grabbed her purse and walked out, her lawyer trailing behind her. Afterward, Randy hugged me tight, said he couldn't have done it without me. I hugged him back, but my heart was heavy. The house was ours again. Megan was out of our lives, but the damage was done. I went back to Linda's that night, and we talked for hours. She said I should move back home, start fresh with Randy, but I wasn't sure. The house didn't feel like mine anymore, not after everything. I kept thinking about what Megan had said in court, about me making her feel like an outsider. It wasn't true, but it made me wonder if I'd missed something, if I'd been too set in my ways, too protective of my space. I didn't want to believe her lies had any truth, but they gnawed at me. Randy started fixing up the house, replacing the furniture. Megan had taken repainting the walls, like he was trying to erase her. He'd call me every day, ask me to come by and see the progress, but I kept putting it off. One afternoon, he showed up at Linda's with a box in his hands. He said he'd found it in the attic, one of the photo albums Megan had taken. It was full of pictures from when he was a kid, him and his dad at the beach, him and me baking cookies for his school fundraiser. He sat next to me on the couch, flipping through the pages, and we laughed and cried, remembering those days. He said, "Mom, this is our home. I need you there." I wanted to say yes, wanted to pack my bags and go, but something stopped me. I told him I'd think about it, and he nodded, didn't push. The days after the hearing were a whirlwind of emotions. I kept replaying the courtroom scenes in my head, the way Megan's tears dried up when the judge ruled against her, the way Randy's voice broke when he testified. It was a victory, but it felt hollow, like we'd won a battle but lost the war for our family. Linda kept encouraging me to take the next step, but I needed time to process. I started walking more around her neighborhood, using the exercise to clear my mind. The heat was oppressive, but the movement helped me think. I'd pass the same houses every day, the same kids playing the same dogs, barking, and it gave me a strange comfort, a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. One evening, I sat with Linda, and we talked about the future. She suggested I might sell the house, give Randy a fresh start too. The idea surprised me, but it stuck. I started thinking about what that would mean, letting go of the place I'd poured my life into. It was scary, but also liberating. I called Randy the next day and brought it up casually. He was quiet for a moment, then said he'd consider it if it was what I wanted. We agreed to talk more about it later, but the conversation opened a door I hadn't expected. I spent the next few days looking at the house through new eyes, wondering if it was time to let it go. Karen called to follow up on the ruling. She said Megan had 30 days to comply with the judge's orders or face further action. She also mentioned Megan's ex-boyfriend might be called to testify, which could complicate things. I thanked her for the update and hung up feeling a mix of relief and dread. The legal battle wasn't over, and I knew Megan would fight to the end. I started keeping a journal, documenting every call, every development, so I wouldn't lose track. It became my way of staying grounded, my way of holding on to the truth amid the uncertainty. Randy kept working on the house, sending me pictures of the new paint colors, the new couch he'd bought. He sounded happier on the phone, like he was reclaiming his space. I was glad for him, but it made me question my place in it all. Linda noticed my hesitation and suggested we visit the house together. We drove over one afternoon and walked through the rooms. The changes were striking: the living room bright with new curtains, the kitchen clean and organized. It felt different, but also familiar, and I wasn't sure how to feel. Randy met us there, showed us everything he'd done, and for a moment it felt like old times. But the memory of that night lingered, and I knew I needed more time. That night, I dreamed of the house as it used to be, Randy, as a little boy running through the halls, me cooking dinner with the radio on. It was a bittersweet dream. Waking up left me longing, but also determined. I talked to Linda about it over breakfast, and she said, maybe the house could be a new start for both of us, not just a return to the past. The idea grew on me, and I started thinking about what I'd need to do to make it work. I called Randy again, told him I was considering coming back, but only if we could rebuild together. He sounded relieved, promised we'd figure it out, and for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Over the next month, I started spending more time at the house, helping Randy with small projects like planting new flowers in the garden or organizing the garage. Being there felt strange at first, like I was a guest in my own home, but slowly it started to feel familiar again. Randy was trying so hard to make things right, cooking dinner for us most nights, talking about the future, like he wanted to rebuild what we'd lost. He'd apologize over and over for believing Megan for throwing me out, and I could see how much it weighed on him. I told him I forgave him, and I meant it, but forgiveness didn't erase the hurt, not completely. One evening, while we were eating spaghetti in the kitchen, he brought up the idea of me moving back for good. He said he'd been thinking about it a lot, that the house was too big for him alone, and it didn't feel right without me. He said he'd made the biggest mistake of his life, letting Megan come between us, and he'd do anything to fix it. His eyes were so earnest, so full of hope, that I almost said yes right then. But instead, I told him I needed to be sure that I wasn't just coming back because it was easy or because I felt obligated. I needed to know it was what I wanted for me, not just for him. That night, I lay awake at Linda's thinking about what home meant. The house in Tampa was where I'd raised Randy, where I'd built a life, but it was also where I'd been betrayed, where I'd lost something I couldn't quite name. I started wondering if staying in Florida was holding me back, if maybe I needed a fresh start somewhere else. Linda had been talking about moving to North Carolina to be closer to her grandkids, and she'd half-jokingly suggested I come with her. At first, I'd laughed it off, but now I was seriously considering it. A new place, a new chapter, where I could be Cheryl, not just Randy's mom or Megan's villain. I didn't tell Randy about North Carolina right away. I wanted to sit with the idea, see if it felt right. I started looking online at houses in Asheville, where Linda's daughter lived. The mountains, the cool air, the idea of a quieter life appealed to me more than I expected. I even called a realtor up there, asked some questions about the market, and she sent me listings that got me excited. But every time I thought about leaving, I'd picture Randy alone in that big house, and my heart would ache. He'd been through so much already, and I didn't want to abandon him. One day, I went to the house to help Randy paint the living room. We were rolling blue paint on the walls, laughing about how he'd gotten more on himself than the wall, when he stopped and looked at me. He said, "Mom, I know I messed up, but I'm trying. I want us to be a family again." His voice was so raw, so full of need, that I felt my resolve waver. I put down my roller and told him the truth about North Carolina, about how I was thinking of moving there with Linda. His face fell, and for a moment I thought he might cry. He said, "But what about me? What about us?" I told him I loved him, that he'd always be my son, but I needed to figure out what was best for me too. He nodded, squeezed my hand, and said he understood, but I could see the hurt in his eyes. After that conversation, things shifted between us. Randy stopped pushing so hard for me to move back, started giving me space. He'd still call, check in, ask about my day, but there was a distance now, like he was bracing himself for me to leave. It broke my heart, but it also made me realize how much I'd been living for him instead of myself. I'd spent my whole life putting him first, and now I was wondering who I was without that role. The more I thought about it, the more North Carolina felt like the right move, not because I was running away, but because I was choosing something for me. I told Linda I was in, that I'd move with her. She was thrilled, started planning our road trip to Asheville, like we were kids going on an adventure. We found a small house to rent together, 2 bedrooms, with a view of the mountains, and I could already picture myself sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee watching the sunrise. I started packing up my things at Linda's, sorting through years of memories. I found an old letter Randy had written me when he was in high school, thanking me for always being there for him. Reading it, I cried, but I also felt a sense of peace. I'd done my job as a mom. Now it was time to do something for myself. The decision wasn't easy. Every box I packed brought up memories of Tampa, the house, the life I'd built. I found old report cards from Randy's school days, a dried flower from a Mother's Day bouquet. He'd given me a ticket stub from a movie we'd seen together. It was like unpacking my past, and it hurt to let go. But it also felt necessary, like I was shedding a skin that no longer fit. Linda helped me sort through it all, keeping me laughing with her stories about our childhood. We'd sit on the floor, surrounded by boxes, sipping tea, and talking about what lay ahead. I called Randy to tell him my decision. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the tension in his voice. I told him I was moving to North Carolina with Linda, that I'd found a place and planned to leave in a week. He was quiet for a long time, and when he spoke, his voice was thick. He said he respected my choice, but asked if he could visit before I left. I said yes, of course, and we set a date. Hanging up, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. Relief that I'd made a choice, and sadness that it meant leaving him behind. The week before the move was a blur. I finished packing, called the realtor in Asheville to confirm details, and coordinated with Linda on the drive. Randy came over 2 days before we left, bringing a small gift, a framed photo of us from years ago at the beach. He handed it to me, said it was to remember the good times. We hugged for a long time, and I could feel his struggle to let go. I promised I'd call him every week visit when I could, and he nodded, trying to smile. That night, I packed the photo carefully, placing it on top of my clothes in the suitcase. Linda and I spent the evening before the move, going over our route, planning stops along the way. She was excited mapping out diners and scenic spots while I tried to match her energy, but my mind kept drifting to Randy, to the house, to the life I was leaving. I wrote him a letter that night, pouring out my feelings, my love for him, my hope for his future. I left it on the kitchen table for him to find after we were gone. By morning, I was ready, bags packed, car loaded, and heart heavy, but determined. The drive to Asheville was long, but gave me time to think. I watched Florida fade into Georgia, then North Carolina, marveling at the changing landscape. Linda kept the radio on, playing old songs we used to sing along to, and it brought a smile. We stopped for lunch at a roadside diner, stretching our legs and laughing over burnt coffee. By the time we reached Asheville, the mountains loomed large and beautiful, and I felt a stir of excitement. The house was small but cozy, and as we unpacked, I started to see a new future taking shape. The day I told Randy I was moving to North Carolina was one of the hardest of my life. I asked him to meet me at the house, and when he walked in, I could tell he knew something was coming. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Megan had accused me all those months ago, and I told him everything. I said I decided to move to Asheville with Linda, that I needed a fresh start, a place that was mine. I told him I loved him more than anything, that this wasn't about him, but about me finding my own path. He listened quietly, his hands folded on the table, and when I finished, he didn't say anything for a long time. Finally, he looked at me, his eyes wet, and said, "I get it, Mom. You've done so much for me, and I let you down. If this is what you need, I won't stop you." His voice was steady, but I could hear the pain in it. I reached for his hand, told him he hadn't let me down, that we'd both been through something awful, but we were stronger for it. I said he was still young, had his whole life to build something new, and I'd always be there for him, no matter where I was. He nodded, squeezed my hand, and said, "I just wish I hadn't pushed you away." I told him we couldn't change the past, but we could choose what came next. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Randy came to Linda's early, helped us load the last of the boxes into the U-Haul. When it was time to say goodbye, I felt my throat tighten. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe and said, "I'm gonna miss you, Mom, but I'm proud of you." I hugged him back, told him I was proud of him too, and that I'd be back to visit soon. Linda was waiting in the driver's seat, giving us our moment. And when I finally pulled away from Randy, I saw tears in his eyes. I climbed into the U-Haul, and as we drove off, I looked back, saw him standing in the driveway, waving until we turned the corner. The drive to Asheville was long, but it gave me time to think. I thought about the house in Tampa, all the memories we'd made there, good and bad. I thought about Megan, how her lies had nearly destroyed us, but also how they'd forced me to see things clearly. I thought about Randy, how he'd grown through this, how he was starting to find his way. And I thought about myself, how I was stepping into something new, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. When we got to Asheville, the mountains were even more beautiful than the pictures, and the little house felt like a promise of something better. I've been in Asheville for a few months now, and I'm settling in. Linda and I spend our days exploring the town, trying new coffee shops, taking walks in the hills. I started painting again, set up a little studio in the spare bedroom, and I'm surprised at how much I love it. Randy calls every week, sends me pictures of the house, how he's fixed it up. He got that marketing job, and he sounds happy, really happy for the first time in a long time. He's coming to visit next month, and I'm already planning hikes we can take together. The first week in Asheville was an adjustment. The air was cooler than I was used to, and the mountains felt both welcoming and intimidating. Linda and I unpacked, slowly turning the house into our own. We hung pictures on the walls, arranged furniture, and laughed over where to put the couch. It was a fresh start, but it came with a pang of homesickness. I'd catch myself thinking about Tampa, the sound of the Gulf waves, the smell of the orange trees. But then I'd step outside, see the mountains, and remind myself why I'd come. I started painting almost by accident. Linda bought me a set of watercolors as a housewarming gift, and I found an old canvas in a thrift store. The first few attempts were clumsy, but I kept at it. I painted the mountains, the trees, the little creek behind our house. It was therapeutic, a way to process everything I'd been through. Linda would sit with me, sometimes bringing tea or snacks, watching as I worked. She said my paintings were getting better, and I started to believe her. It was a new side of me, one I hadn't explored in years. Randy's calls became a highlight. He'd tell me about his new job, how he was meeting new people, how the house was finally feeling like home again. I'd send him pictures of my paintings, ask about his progress. One day, he sent a video of the kitchen, fully renovated with new cabinets and a fresh coat of paint. I watched it twice, smiling at how much effort he'd put in. He asked about Asheville, wanted to know every detail, and I told him about the hikes, the coffee shops, the quiet nights. It felt like we were rebuilding our connection, one call at a time. Linda and I joined a local community group, met other retirees who'd moved for the mountains. We'd gather at someone's house, play cards, share stories. It was a slow way to make friends, but it helped me feel rooted. One woman, my age, named Ellen, had moved from Texas, and we hit it off over a shared love of gardening. She invited me to help her plant a vegetable patch, and I found myself enjoying the dirt under my nails, the smell of fresh soil. It was a small thing, but it added to my new life. Randy's visit was set for mid-July. I counted down the days cleaned, the house-planned meals. Linda teased me about being a nervous host, but I wanted it to be perfect. When he arrived, he looked good, healthier than he had in months. We hugged for a long time, and he said the drive had been worth it. We spent the weekend hiking, exploring the Biltmore estate, eating at local diners. He loved the mountains, said he could see why I'd chosen this place. It was the best time we'd had together in years, and it eased some of the guilt I'd felt about leaving. After he left, I kept busy with my painting and gardening. I sold a couple of pieces at a local market, and the money felt like a bonus to my new independence. Randy called to say he'd framed one of my paintings in the Tampa house, and I laughed at the thought. Life in Asheville was settling into a rhythm, and I was starting to feel at home. I thought about Megan, sometimes wondered where she'd ended up, but it didn't matter anymore. She was part of the past, and I was building a future. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set over the mountains. Randy called to say he'd been promoted at work, and I cheered for him over the phone. We talked about his plans, my paintings, his next visit. It felt right, like we'd found a new balance. I hung up, looked at the mountains, and smiled. This was my choice, my life, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. If this story hit you, check out the next one on your screen. Click subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming. Thanks for being here.